Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a crowded room, but it's not just a room. It's a battlefield of noise, a cacophony of opinions, a constant hum of chatter, the endless ping of notifications. Everyone is shouting to be heard. You see people on social media, in arguments at the dinner table, in the comments section of a news article, each one desperate to have the last word. Your own heart starts to pound, your mind racing, filled with 1,000 clever comebacks and irrefutable points. You feel this almost desperate, primal urge to respond, to prove you're right, to impose your will on the situation. But what if I told you that in that very moment, the moment you feel that frantic need to react, you have already lost? The world teaches us that strength is measured by the volume of our voice, by our ability to win an argument, to always have a sharp retort ready. But Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who stared into the abyss of human nature and didn't blink, saw this completely differently. Nietzsche understood that true power isn't about shouting louder or forcefully convincing others. It lies in what you choose not to say. In a world drowning in noise, those who truly possess power are not the ones screaming the loudest. They are the ones who observe, who wait, and whose silence is so profound that when they finally speak, every word carries the weight of a stone dropped into a calm lake. The compulsion to speak, to respond, to justify oneself, is a subtle form of weakness. Zattel. Those who desperately seek to be heard are, deep down, seeking validation. They are reacting, and in a profound sense, those who react are being controlled. Think about it. A puppet only moves when its strings are pulled. A person who constantly feels the need to respond is just a puppet to external stimuli, a slave to the opinions and provocations of others. On the other hand, those who have mastered silence possess a different kind of authority. It's an authority that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It's a quiet, unshakable confidence that terrifies the insecure. Think of the people who have truly made an impact on you. Were they the ones who spoke incessantly, filling every empty space with words? Or were they the ones whose few, well-chosen words struck you like a precise blow? Well-used silence generates mystery, it generates respect, and most powerfully, it generates discomfort. And discomfort, as any great artist or philosopher knows, is what makes people think. So the question you need to ask yourself is this: do you have control over your words? Or are you a slave to the desperate need to be heard? Do you truly know when to speak and when to simply let silence do the work for you? Because the truth is, sometimes silence isn't just a choice. It's a challenge that very few have the strength to face. The world has never been so noisy. Everyone has an opinion they feel compelled to share. Social media has turned conversations into public battles where victory is not achieved through truth, but through volume and repetition. But Nietzsche would warn us that this obsession with speaking, with responding, with broadcasting your position to the world is not strength. It is disguised weakness. Stop and think. Why do people feel this almost compulsive need to express themselves at all times? The answer is simple and profoundly human. They are afraid. Afraid of being irrelevant. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid that their silence will be interpreted as submission. So they fill every empty space with words that they often don't even fully believe, just to avoid the terror of insignificance. But Nietzsche understood, and what few today may grasp, is that the one who masters silence will never be insignificant. On the contrary, they become an enigma. They become someone who cannot be easily categorized or predicted. And the unpredictable will always be more powerful than the obvious. The noise of the world is a trap. It creates the illusion that those who speak the most, who impose themselves the most, and who respond the fastest are the ones who win. But that is the logic of the weak. Nietzsche saw life as a battlefield of wills. And on that field, the warrior who charges into battle first is not always the one who emerges victorious. Often, it is the one who knows how to wait, who observes, who perceives the enemy's flaws before they attack. Look at the true masters of strategy, whether in philosophy, war, or business. They do not speak more than they need to. They do not rush to respond. They do not wear themselves out trying to prove something to everyone. They know that sometimes the best move is to let the other person exhaust themselves trying to decipher them. Nietzsche did not see silence as a weakness, but as an assertion of strength. Those who master silence control the rhythm of the game. They are the ones who hold the power because they force the other person to fill the void, to speak more than they should, to reveal their weaknesses, and to expose themselves. Modern society, with its constant need for validation and external noise, cannot stand silence, because silence forces introspection. And introspection, the act of looking inward, is dangerous for those who have built their entire identity on external noise. So I ask you again, are you in control of your voice? Or are you just another lost soul in the incessant noise of the world? Do you know when to speak and when to remain silent? Or do you feel a profound restlessness in the void of your own absence? If you cannot bear silence, perhaps it is telling you something you are afraid to hear. Nietzsche believed that the vast majority of people live chained to illusions. Illusions about morality, about what is good and evil, about what is right and wrong. From a young age, we are taught to fit in, to follow rules, to respect conventions. But what if I told you that these rules were not made to strengthen you, but rather to domesticate you, to make you predictable and manageable? The concept of the Übermensch, Nietzsche's idea of the Superman, is not about muscles, money, or social status. It is about something far more powerful: absolute mastery over oneself. The Übermensch does not react impulsively. He does not feel the desperate need to be accepted. He does not feel the need to prove anything to anyone. He creates his own values, his own rules, his own path. And one of the main weapons of this superior being is precisely silence. Think about it. What happens when you remain silent in a situation where everyone expects a response? Silence generates discomfort, creates mystery. Most importantly, it reverses the power dynamic. When you refuse to react at the expected moment, you force the other person to deal with their own anxiety. Nietzsche understood that the average human being is terrified of emptiness. They need to fill everything with words, explanations, and justifications. But the Übermensch understands that silence can be more powerful than any argument. See the difference between a true leader and someone who needs to shout to be heard. The true leader does not need to raise their voice. They do not need to justify themselves at every step. Their presence alone commands respect because they exist so firmly and unwaveringly. Now, look at those who are always talking, always trying to convince others that they are strong, intelligent, or superior. Deep down, this incessant chatter is just a confession of insecurity. Nietzsche saw this difference clearly. The one who talks too much, who reacts to everything, and who is bothered by every provocation is being controlled. They are a slave to their emotions, a prisoner of external validation. But the one who knows how to be silent, who chooses their words with precision, and who allows others to wear themselves out trying to decipher them, that is the true master of the situation. The Übermensch is not affected by others' opinions. He doesn't need the recognition of others to exist. And for that reason, he doesn't wear himself out trying to prove anything. He knows that his strength does not lie in how many words he says, but in the silent impact of his presence. Now I ask you, do you have control over your words? Or do your words control you? Are you the owner of your voice? Or are you just reacting like a puppet to the opinions of others? Because in the end, those who truly have power never despair to be heard. Have you ever noticed how silence makes people uncomfortable? A small moment of pause in a conversation is enough for someone to try to fill it with any words, even a meaningless comment. Silence creates a vacuum, and human beings have an aversion to vacuums. We need to fill that space. We need to feel in control of the situation. But Nietzsche understood a brutal truth. Whoever controls silence controls the minds of others. Silence is a psychological weapon. It disarms, it confuses, and it makes the other person reveal themselves without you having to move a single muscle. When someone is waiting for a response and doesn't receive one, their brain enters a state of uncertainty. They desperately try to decipher what's happening. Are you ignoring them out of disdain? Do you know something they don't? Did they say too much and not realize it? The other person's mind becomes a labyrinth of doubts while yours remains intact. Nietzsche understood that silence can be used as a test of power. Look at the great strategists, the masters of persuasion, the leaders who have made history. They don't speak more than they need to. They make the other person wear themselves out first. They let their adversaries talk, talk, talk until they reveal their weaknesses, until they get lost in their own words. Silence is like a mirror. It forces the other person to confront themselves, to see their own insecurity exposed. Now think of a common confrontation, a discussion between two people. Who seems to be in control? The one who gets worked up, who pours out arguments nonstop, who tries to convince the other at any cost? Or the one who remains calm, who observes, who allows the other to wear themselves out alone? The first is reacting, letting themselves be carried away by emotion. The second is in control. When you remain silent, you put the other in a vulnerable position. They can interpret your silence in various ways: disinterest, disdain, superiority. But the only certainty they will have is this: you are not being controlled. And that in itself is enough to make them uneasy. Nietzsche saw silence as a reflection of inner strength. The one who can endure silence, who doesn't need to fill the void with unnecessary words, is someone who has mastered themselves. They don't need validation from others. They don't need to justify themselves. They don't need to prove anything. And that is exactly why they are seen as a threat. Now I ask you, how many times have you felt uncomfortable with silence? How many times have you tried to fill a moment of pause just to avoid embarrassment? And more importantly, how many times have you been manipulated by someone who knew the power of silence at the right moment? Because in the end, whoever controls silence controls the game. Silence isn't just a weapon against others. It is a test against yourself. The truth is simple. Most people cannot stand silence. They talk not because they have something important to say, but because emptiness frightens them. Nietzsche understood that to achieve true strength, you would need to face that discomfort head-on. Think about how many times you've felt compelled to explain something, to justify yourself, or to fill the silence with words that were unnecessary. Have you noticed that when you are silent, the people around you start to fidget? They interpret your silence as arrogance, disinterest, or even as an attack. This happens because we live in a society that conditions everyone to seek constant acceptance. Remaining silent means rejecting that game, and the rejection of that game is unsettling. Nietzsche saw silence as an act of rebellion. The one who remains silent in the face of noise is saying, without needing a single word, I do not play this game. I do not need to fit in. This frightens people. They don't know how to deal with someone who doesn't react as expected, who doesn't panic to be understood. Because deep down, the desire to be understood is a form of dependence. Those who need to be understood are, in a way, asking for permission to exist. But Nietzsche's Übermensch does not ask for permission. He creates his own values regardless of others' acceptance. And this requires a kind of courage that few possess. Because enduring silence means bearing the weight of loneliness. It means accepting that often no one will understand your choice. Look at the great thinkers in history, the visionaries, the revolutionaries. They weren't well received immediately. Their ideas were ridiculed, ignored, and fought against. But they did not need to shout to be heard. They endured the silence of misunderstanding, the silence of rejection, and they continued on because truth does not need applause to exist. Now think about your own life. How many times have you felt the desperate need to explain your choices, to prove you are right, to seek approval from others? And how many of those times did it really change anything? Or was your quest for explanation merely a reflection of your own deep-seated fear of not being accepted? Nietzsche challenges us to go beyond that fear. He forces us to ask, are you speaking because you truly have something to say, or because you fear silence? Do you need to be understood, or are you strong enough to move on without that need? Because those who fear silence will never be truly free. Silence is not just an absence of words. It is a tool, a strategy, a game of power. But like any weapon, it needs to be used at the right moment. Nietzsche did not advocate for never speaking. He advocated for speaking only when necessary. Now think about all the conversations you've had in the last month. How many of them really mattered? How many were just noise? How many times did you find yourself explaining something that didn't need to be explained? Responding to meaningless provocations, trying to convince someone who deep down would never change their mind? How many words did you throw away just because you felt the need to fill the silence? Nietzsche saw this behavior as a form of psychological slavery. Those who talk all the time are always reacting to the world, always trying to justify their existence. But those who speak only when they want to, when they choose, when they truly decide it's worth it, they hold power. They command respect. Look at the great strategists in history. They never spoke more than necessary. They knew when to retreat, when to wait, when to remain silent so that others would reveal themselves. And when they finally spoke, their words carried immense weight because they were rare, because they were measured, because they were impossible to ignore. The problem with most people is that they speak without thinking. They react. They fall into the trap of provocation and the need to always have the last word. They don't realize that by doing this, they are becoming predictable. Nietzsche knew that unpredictability is one of the greatest weapons one can have. Those who do not react as expected become a mystery, and mystery is always more powerful than transparency. So, how do we apply this philosophy? How do we use silence strategically? First, learn to observe before responding. Most people respond before fully understanding what is being said. They feel an almost uncontrollable urge to give an opinion, to correct or to argue. But the one who masters silence waits. They observe, they analyze, and only then do they decide if it's worth responding. Second, ask yourself, does this conversation really need me? Not every dialogue deserves your attention. Many discussions are just ego games, meaningless battles where no one is truly interested in the truth. If the conversation adds nothing, if the other side is not willing to listen, what's the point of wasting your energy? Nietzsche would say, let them talk alone. Third, when you do speak, speak with weight. If you get used to speaking less, every time you open your mouth, people will stop to listen. Your words will carry a weight that those who talk all the time will never have. You don't need to convince everyone. You just need to speak in a way that makes every word count. Because in the end, it's not about how many words you say, it's about how much impact you make. Now I ask you, do you have control over your words, or do they have control over you? Do you choose when to speak, or do you just react like a robot programmed by the need to express yourself? Nietzsche teaches us that those who speak less but with purpose will never be ignored. Those who master silence will never be a slave to noise. In the end, it all comes down to one question. Do you control your silence, or does your silence control you? Nietzsche saw life as a game of forces. In this game, the weak talk too much, try to justify themselves, and try to convince others. The strong, on the other hand, do not need approval. They understand that the need to speak all the time is just a symptom of insecurity. They know that the absence of words can carry more weight than 1,000 speeches. Silence is not just an empty space. It is a reflection of who you really are. When you are silent, you force the world to see you without distractions. You reveal your true essence, and for many, this is unbearable. This is because most people build their identity based on how others react to them. But what if you took away that reaction? What if you didn't give the answer they expect? Who would you be without that need for validation? Nietzsche believed that few are ready for that answer. Few are willing to face the weight of their own silence. But those who do, those who master this art, become unshakable. Because it doesn't matter what they say about you. It doesn't matter what they think. You don't need to explain yourself. Now I want to know from you. When was the last time you remained silent when they expected you to speak? Have you noticed the impact this has on the people around you? Tell me in the comments. And if this idea made you think, if it challenged you in some way, you can't stop here. The next video will take you even deeper. No matter what you think you already know, it's essential that you watch. Have you ever noticed how silence makes people uncomfortable? Just a small moment of pause in a conversation is enough for someone to try to fill it with words. Any words, even a meaningless comment. Silence creates a vacuum, and human beings have an aversion to vacuums. We need to fill that space. We need to feel in control of the situation. But Nietzsche understood a brutal truth. Whoever controls silence controls the minds of others. Silence is a psychological weapon. It disarms, confuses, and makes the other person reveal themselves without you having to move a single muscle. When someone is waiting for a response and doesn't receive one, their brain enters a state of uncertainty, desperately trying to decipher what's happening. Are you ignoring them out of disdain? Do you know something they don't? Did they say too much and not realize it? The other person's mind becomes a labyrinth of doubts while yours remains intact. Nietzsche understood that silence can be used as a test of power. Look at the great strategists, the masters of persuasion, the leaders who have made history. They don't speak more than they need to. They make the other person wear themselves out first. They let their adversaries talk until they reveal their weaknesses, until they get lost in their own words. Silence is like a mirror. It forces the other person to confront themselves, to see their own insecurity exposed. Now think of a common confrontation, a discussion between two people. Who seems to be in control? The one who gets worked up, who pours out arguments nonstop, who tries to convince the other at any cost? Or the one who remains calm, who observes, who allows the other to wear themselves out alone? The first is reacting, letting themselves be carried away by emotion. The second is in control. When you remain silent, you put the other in a vulnerable position. They can interpret your silence in various ways: disinterest, disdain, superiority. But the only certainty they will have is this: you are not being controlled. And that in itself is enough to make them uneasy. Nietzsche saw silence as a reflection of inner strength. The one who can endure silence, who doesn't need to fill the void with unnecessary words, is someone who has mastered themselves. They don't need validation from others, they don't need to justify themselves, they don't need to prove anything. And that is exactly why they are seen as a threat. Now I ask you, how many times have you felt uncomfortable with silence? How many times have you tried to fill a moment of pause just to avoid embarrassment? And, more importantly, how many times have you been manipulated by someone who knew the power of silence at the right moment? Because, in the end, whoever controls silence controls the game. Silence isn't just a weapon against others. It is a test against yourself. The truth is simple. Most people cannot stand silence. They talk not because they have something important to say, but because emptiness frightens them. Nietzsche understood that to achieve true strength, you would need to face that discomfort head-on. Think about how many times you felt compelled to explain something, to justify yourself, or to fill the silence with words that were unnecessary. Have you noticed that when you are silent, the people around you start to fidget? They interpret your silence as arrogance, disinterest, or even as an attack. This happens because we live in a society that conditions everyone to seek constant acceptance. Remaining silent means rejecting that game, and the rejection of that game is unsettling. Nietzsche saw silence as an act of rebellion. The one who remains silent in the face of noise is saying, without needing a single word, I do not play this game. I do not need to fit in. This frightens people. They don't know how to deal with someone who doesn't react as expected, who doesn't panic to be understood. Because, deep down, the desire to be understood is a form of dependence. Those who need to be understood are, in a way, asking for permission to exist. But Nietzsche's Übermensch does not ask for permission. He creates his own values regardless of others' acceptance. And this requires a kind of courage that few possess. Because enduring silence means bearing the weight of loneliness. It means accepting that often no one will understand your choice.